So, welcome again. I think I keep forgetting. I think this is lecture 96 or 97, as we are in the guide for the Perplexed, part 3, chapter 12. We are on page 446 in the Pines edition for those that have it. And I am about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down the page where it says, if one restricts oneself to what is necessary. Now, let me remind you, Rambam in this chapter is dealing with why there is evil in the world, why there is bad, why there is suffering. He doesn't give a full comprehensive answer. However, he does explain, and he's in the middle of talking now because I'm in the middle of this paragraph. He's discussing how most bad things that happen to people happen because of our own actions, right? So he listed three types of evil. The type of evil that happens because of nature, an earthquake or a hurricane. The second type of evil was that which one person does to another, and the third is, which he says is the vast majority of evils, is things we bring upon ourselves because of our own behavior. And what he just finished talking about was how people decide that they want to have what someone else has. They decide that they deserve to have some wealth or something. And then they take upon themselves risky behavior in order to obtain that. And then when they don't get it, or they suffer because of their own choices, which were bad choices to begin with, they blame God and say, oh, why did God bring upon me this suffering? And his example was a person who wants to get rich. And he decides in order to get rich, he's going to go on a long, dangerous voyage through the sea. And while he's on his long, dangerous voyage, instead of getting rich, he gets stuck in a storm and he loses everything, maybe even his life. So when that happens, and then he starts crying to God, why, God, did you make me suffer through this this hurricane or whatever it was? So meanwhile, it wasn't God. He decided to do it. When you take risks, unfortunately, most of the time, that's why they call them risks, right? You end up suffering. Anyway, so the Rambam is going to continue with this point, but he's going to start emphasizing the point that we seek more than we need. We seek more than we want. We seek more than we should have. And because of that, we often don't even obtain the things that we do need. And then we end up suffering. So if one restricts oneself to what is necessary, Rambam says, right? If we were satisfied with what we actually need, right? This is the easiest of things and maybe obtained with a small effort. If all we sought was the things that we really need, just the basic stuff, a safe place to live, some water to drink, and some basic food to eat, and we weren't seeking so many, those things don't require nearly as much effort. Whatever in it that is seen as difficult and hard for us is due to the following reason. When one endeavors to seek what is unnecessary, it becomes difficult to find even what is necessary. You end up overreaching, you end up overspending, you end up overworking, and you end up not even having the health and the things that you needed, that you actually did need. For the more frequently hopes cling to the superfluous, the more you sit and hope and desire things that are extra, that are unnecessary, the more onerous does the matter become. It gets harder and harder to do. It's harder and harder to live that way. Forces and revenues are spent for what is unnecessary. You end up overspending. You end up owing way too much on your credit cards. And then the next thing you know is you're bankrupt, right? Because you spent what you didn't need. And that which is necessary is not found. And now you actually can't afford what you actually need because you mess yourself up by seeking and reaching for things that you didn't actually need. You ought to consider the circumstances in which we are placed with regard to its being found. Think about how the world works. Think about how hard or easy it is to get the things that we actually need. For the more a thing is necessary for a living being, the more necessary something is, the more often it may be found and the cheaper it is. Because the most basic necessities of life are the easiest and cheapest things to find. Why, on the other hand, the less necessary it is, the less often it is found and is very expensive. The less things are needed, the harder it is to find them. What do I mean? For instance, what is necessary for man? What does a person need? He needs air, water, and food, right? Now, but air is the most necessary. You can't live in air for a moment without dying. Water, you can live a day or two without water, right? And water is more necessary than food because if you have water, food, you can live for 4 or 5 days without food. Accordingly, in every city, you find water more frequently at a cheaper price than food. Air, which we need, is very easy. You don't have to spend any money. You just breathe. Air is everywhere. Water is easy, much easier to find, and food is a little harder to find, right? The basic necessities of food, if you go to the supermarket, is still true today, right? If all you're buying is the things that you really need, you can usually afford it, right? But if you decide that you want to get fancy food and this food, and I have to have this, I have to have that, all of a sudden you find yourself buying brand names, and the next thing you know, you can't afford it anymore, right? These are similar with regard to foodstuffs. Those that are most necessary, easy to find at a given place and cheaper than the unnecessary. Regarding musk, like perfume, amber, rubies, emeralds, I do not think that anyone of sound intellect can believe that man has a strong need for them, unless maybe there might be some medical treatments that you can use with these valuables. And even in those cases, you can replace them with all kinds of herbs and earths. In other words, Rambam is, as the doctor is saying this, right? In other words, even those things which you think are those things that are valuable, we don't need them. You don't need a diamond necklace. It's not necessary, right? You can easily live without it, and that's why. And of course, diamonds are rare and hard to find. And if you try to find them, you'll end up spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you may end up failing. This is a manifestation of the beneficence and munificence of God. Remember, Rambam is saying all this in the context of why people suffer. And he's saying it in the context of people suffering because of their own deeds, their own actions, and what they do. And I think this is obviously this doesn't give a complete answer to the question of why evil exists in the world, but it certainly gives an answer to a large extent, of why much of the suffering in the world happens, because this reminds me a little bit of a story that's in my family. When my great grandfather, who was the Rebbe of Moditz, a Hasidic rabbi, was running from the Nazis. So he ran he lived in a town right near Warsaw. And when the Germans started bombing Warsaw, he and my grandfather and two of my grandfather's brothers ran. Eventually made it to Lithuania. Eventually made it across Russia to Japan, and they escaped with they were some of those saved by the famous Japanese diplomat Sugihara. Anyway, so while he was running, so he's a Hasidic rabbi, and he landed in a town in Lithuania on one Shabbos where there were non-Hasidic Jews, and they found this rabbi just was in their midst for Shabbos, right? And they weren't expecting, so they came to his table Friday night, wherever he found a place to stay, and he started. The Hasidic custom is the Rebbe gives out food. He takes some food and he gives out to people some of his food. So when he started doing that, because that was his custom, some people were chuckling a little bit, and they just looked like a silly custom to them. And he said out loud to everybody, don't laugh at this custom. It's called shirayim, giving out leftovers. He said, don't laugh at this custom. If Hitler knew this custom, I wouldn't be here. So everyone, look, what's he talking about? He says, what's wrong with Hitler, right? He decided that Germany's not enough. He needs to have Czechoslovakia. He needs to have Austria. He needs to have Poland. So he invades. He starts a war because what he has is not enough. He needs more. The lesson of the shirayim that I'm giving out is that I take what I need, and what I don't need, I give out to other people, right? If Hitler understood that lesson, he has what he has. Germany has Germany. He doesn't need everything else. This is the kind of the lesson that Rambam is trying to teach here. That when we start reaching for more, that's when human suffering starts. When we're not satisfied with the things we actually need, that's when the trouble begins. Regarding so this is a manifestation of the beneficence. I'm starting the second paragraph from 447, shown even with regard to this weak living creature and us, right? Us as weak living creatures. Regarding manifestations of his justice and of the equality established by him between them, they are very evident. When you look at human beings as human beings, every human being is basically the same, right? There isn't any major substantive difference. I mean, yes, you do find exceptions to the rule, of course. Somebody could have a certain injury or an illness or whatever, but for the most part, every human being is basically the same. We have the same needs, the same physical structure, right? For within the domain of natural generation and corruption, we're born, we come to be, and we eventually die and become one again with the earth and rot away. The same thing with species of animals. right? There's no case in which one animal from one species is different from another animal of the same species by having a special faculty that only he has or an additional part of the body. This is, of course, before the theory of evolution, where we understand that you can have tiny differences that eventually, whatever. But the bottom line is, you look at a whole bunch of lions, they all look the same. They all have a nose, they all have fangs, they all have a mouth structure like this, and fur like that, and a tail like this, and legs like that, and paws and nails, and so on and so forth. For all natural, psychic, and animal faculties in all the parts that are found in one particular individual are found, as far as the essence is concerned, in the next one. Even though there be accidentally a deficiency because of something that's supervened, maybe something happened in nature that caused one lion to look a little different or one person to be a little different. But the bottom line is that every person has 5 fingers on the right hand, 5 fingers on the left hand, and so on and so forth. But that's rare when you have those exceptions. There in no way exists a relation of superiority and inferiority between individuals conforming to the course of nature. I am no better than you when you look at us and our nature. You and I look the same, act the same, have the same needs, the same wants, the same desires, right? And same thing with every animal of every species. It works that way. This being necessary on account of the nature of the matter. He's going with Aristotelian physics, right? The matter of which we are made and the form which we are given results in the creature that we see in front of us, right? So as for the fact that one individual possesses sachets and clothes adorned with gold and the other lacks these superfluities, there's no injustice and no inequity in this, right? The essence of me is the same as the essence of him. When I'm happy, my happiness is no worse than the happiness of the guy that's driving a fancier car than me, right? When I put my shirt on, that it gives me the warmth that I require. It's no better than the warmth that the guy next to me who has a shirt that he bought in a fancy store or is made out of silk or whatever, right? He who has obtained these luxuries has not gained thereby an increment in his substance. The person is no different. The person is the same. A very wise person taught me a long time ago that if you're speaking to someone, let's say, everyone wants to be happy, right? So what the Rambam is really talking about here is we complain that there's evil, there's suffering in the world. But many, many times that supposed evil, supposed suffering is simply coming because we imagine that we don't have something that we think we need, but we don't. So just imagine for a moment, you're a psychologist or a counselor, and somebody comes to you and they're complaining, they're crying, they're sad, they're upset, they're depressed. And you ask them why they're sad. Well, I didn't get this job. I don't have the salary that I really need. I don't have the house that I need. I don't have the car, whatever it is they're complaining about, right? So you tell them, you talk and counsel them however you do. But let's say the person that comes into your office, is highly unlikely to occur, was not the person next door to you in DC or Alabama or wherever it is that you live in the United States. But it's a person who is it's a person who's a street sweeper in Calcutta, India, who's impoverished, who's poor, right? And he's upset because yesterday he made 5 cents because he was able to sweep 2 streets. And now someone took 1 street, so he's only able to make half that, right? He has to be happy too, right? So, but the essence is the satisfaction we have from life, no matter what station we're in, no matter what we have or we don't have, right? Ultimately, the end of the story, satisfaction with our lives and happiness with that what we're doing is constructive, is important. That's what matters, not whether you're living in a big fancy place or not. So the Rambam says, what is this person? All he has obtained is nothing better in his essence. It's something superfluous. It's a false imagining or a plaything. He got a fancier toy. That's it. And he who lacks the superfluities of life is not necessarily deficient, right? So this is, and he brings a pasuk and that from Shemos, right? And he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. Is referring to the man, right? Everyone at the time in the midbar took a portion of man, right? And everyone had the same thing. The man fulfilled the needs of each family according to that family, because that's all that was necessary, right? This is what happens for the most part at every time and every place. That's basically how the world works. And as we have made clear, no attention should be paid to anomalies. Yeah, sure, there's some exceptions to the rule. But what the Rambam, when he says this, not paying attention to anomalies, he's really telling us that his answer is not a complete and total answer. He can't explain to you why Reuven is rich, even though he's not such a great guy, and why Shimon is poor, even though he's the most wonderful guy. He's not answering that question, which is the question that bothers us. What he's telling us is, if you look at the world, you'll see that the vast majority of what we complain about when we ask why bad things happen are things that happen because of our own desires, because of our wanting things that we don't need, taking risks that we shouldn't take, and so on, our own behaviors. So then finishing this chapter through the two considerations that have been set forth, his beneficence with regard to his creation, he be exalted, with regard to his creatures, will become clear to you, and that he brings into existence what is necessary according to its order of importance, and he makes individuals of the same species equal at their creation. Every human being, every lion is like every other lion, every giraffe is like every other giraffe, every person is like every other person. We're all the same, right? Right? Remember, no attention being paid to anomalies, like Rambam said. With a view to this true consideration, he says, all of his ways are judgment. All right, all the paths of God are mercy and truth, and so on. For his bringing us into existence is absolutely the great good, as we have made clear, right? What God does is good, and the creation of this governing faculty in the living beings, the creation of this, the fact that we have a mind, we have a brain, and we can perceive these things. These are things that make us all the same, as we have made clear. So that concludes chapter 12 in his discussion of evil, right? We only did the tail end of it tonight. For those of you that weren't here the last 2 weeks, I highly recommend going back to those. I'm going to stop here for a minute and take questions and comments, and then we can go on to chapter 13, which is going to be a real, it's, in my opinion, probably one of the most consequential and most powerful chapters in the entire Moreh Nevuchim. But first, let's open the floor to questions about what we just talked about.
What are the numbers of the last two sessions?
I don't remember. It was somewhere around 94, 95, and this is 96, I think. But if you go onto the website, either I post the YouTube videos both on my own channel, and I also post it on the Yeshiva Selling Melech channel. If you go to the Yeshiva Selling Melech, either one, I write little summaries of each video. So if you want to look and see what the basic subject matter is, you
last
can see
week was 95.
It's 95. Okay, it's today 95 or
no? Last week was.
Last week was 95. Yeah,
I just checked on the channel.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. So so chapter 13. I'm sorry. Are there more questions? I'm sorry.
Yes, I have a question. Doesn't it seem that it seems to me anyway that Maimonides is presenting a view of man that really there really isn't much use for God in this view. You simply live.
Well,
I mean,
I think you've brought this point up many times, and I've kind of agreed with your point, and that is that Maimonides and Rambam, because of his, well, this is his basic philosophy. Like, nature runs according to nature, right? God created the world to run in the way that it runs, right? So so almost all of his philosophical answers are that's the way it is, are kind of a little more elaborate explanations, but the bottom line is that's the way it is. And the role of God is what he brings in at the end, right? At the end of this chapter, the role of God is that our very existence, right? The purpose, our very existence is the purpose. And when I say ours, I don't mean human beings, and you're going to see that in a lot more detail in the next chapter. But the existence of existence is a good thing, right? The fact that we are able to study this, perceive this, and understand this, that's it, right? Right? And the role of God is that God created this, right? Because in his wisdom, he felt this should be done, right? And that's it. That's God's role. That's it. But it is a very big it, right? It's the entire. Go ahead.
It doesn't seem like he takes that God that in Maimonides' estimation that God takes meticulous attention to every single thought and action that humans take. He basically
Yeah, what you're talking about now is called hashgacha pratis, right? Is that God pays attention to the details, right, of each person's life. Now, that what you have just expressed, Rambam will discuss hashgacha, God's attention to the world, right? And we're gonna. It's a huge subject, but the Rambam writes about it extensively, and we are going to study that together, but not this week, right?
Okay.
What his views are on whether he pays meticulous attention to every detail. So I'm not going to give it away now because it's a major subject. It's a subject where Rambam diverges from many other Jewish philosophers, but his opinion is a very important one, of course. And I promise, hang in there, and we'll get there. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments on chapter 12 before I go on to 13? Okay, so if there aren't, then then we can go ahead and go to 13. So here, I don't know if we can finish the whole thing. It's a little long, but this like I was saying before is a hugely consequential and very important chapter of the Rambam. So often, the minds of perfect men have grown perplexed over the question of what is the final end of that which exists. Dum, dum, dum. We have to have like some eerie music behind. Well, like, where's this all going, right? I mean, this is the big question with a capital B, right? Well, what's the purpose of it all? Where's the whole world going? And yes, the Rambam is asking that question. People think, and they start, well, why? Like, where are we going, right? How does this all end? Okay, I mean, there's a lot of movies about that, but this is now the Rambam's version. Okay, so now the Rambam says, I will explain that in all schools this question is abolished. In all schools, meaning in people that think, right, and people that have a brain, this is not a question. There's no purpose in asking this question. Now, what do I mean? There's no purpose in asking this question. Now, let me ask you guys a question, and I want to hear if anyone's willing to talk, and try to limit it to a sentence or two. What do you think? And I'm going to be a little specific. What do you think the Torah teaches is the purpose of it all? I know that's a giant question, but go ahead.
Perfect our soul.
Perfect. Okay, so give us the opportunity to perfect ourselves. Okay. Anyone else want to posit what they think the Torah teaches? I'm asking you specifically, not what you think. I'm asking you what you think the Torah teaches. Is anyone? No one else has the guts to say. I see.
Hora means hora'ah, which is teaching. So it teaches everything.
Well, you just said. Are you cheating or something or what?
No, I just I
actually,
learn Torah
this
every day. I
chapter
teach Torah every day.
Okay, so in other words, for the wisdom, right? Well, I don't know if that's what you're saying exactly, but in this chapter, the Rambam actually talks about the meaning of the word Torah. And exactly like you said, teaching. So that was really good. So I just think you looked ahead and you're cheating, and that's it. But fine. All right. Anyone else want to venture to guess what you think the Torah thinks is the purpose of it? Where does this all go? Where does this all end? All right. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, fine. All right. So no one else wants to say anything. Good. So the Rambam is going to lay this out, and let's try to. I say then that in the case of every agent who acts with a purpose, right? Whenever you have a person or an agent, anything that does something with a reason, the thing he has done must necessarily have some end with the view to which it has been done, right? So let's say you and I decide, right, I'm going to make a table, right? Why am I making a table? Because it's a nice place to eat or give lectures, right? Or sit around with your friend. But there's a purpose to the table, right? So it has so I am creating a table because I want this table to fulfill XYZ function, right? So whenever if a lion decides to crouch behind a rock and then pounce on a deer, then the lion is doing that with the end result of having a dead deer to eat, right? So in other words, everything that any creature does with a purpose, it has an end result, right? It's supposed to accomplish something. According to philosophic speculation, this is clear and does not need a demonstration. What I just said is philosophically sound statement, Rambam says. It is also clear that a thing that has been done in this way with a purpose must have been produced in time after not having existed, right? If I decide to make a table, right, I'm sitting down and I say, darn, it would be so much easier to eat my dinner if I had a table to put it on. So then I go and I chop down a tree and I make a table, right? So in other words, there was a time when the table didn't exist, and then I made the table and now it exists, right? So among the things that are clear also belong to the fact, and this is universally admitted, that he whose existence is necessary, something that exists because it exists, right? In other words, it has to be, who has never and will never be non-existent, does not need an agent, right? Remember, Rambam said, according to Aristotle, all nature has always existed. Why? Because the laws of nature are real. The laws of nature are perfect, right? Everything is the way it is because it has to be this way, because that's what the laws of nature dictate, right? And the laws of nature dictated that the world should be as it is today. And it dictated yesterday the same rules existed. So the same world that exists today must have existed yesterday, and so on and so forth, back into infinity, which is the doctrine of Aristotle. That's why the world had to always be and always has to be in the future, because the same laws that apply today, those basic laws of nature, applied before. Remember, they didn't understand what we now know about the universe, evolving into what it evolved into, from starting from a big bang, which was very different from it is today, right? So it's a very different understanding. But if you remember back when we talked about this in book 2, that I told you that the same thing would be applied today. Like Rambam would tell you, right, that the laws of nature themselves, right, were created when God created the universe. So therefore, whatever laws there are that dictate the way the world is are only laws that are relevant from creation on, right? Because prior to creation, which in itself is a misnomer, because there was no such thing as time, right? So, but still, before God, so the bottom line being, right, something that always exists, such as God himself, right? There is no as he has not been made, no question. So you were not going to ask what's the purpose of God's existence, right? Because nobody made God, right? If there was another God that made God, and remember, Rambam did go through those philosophers who said that, well, this one was made by that one, was made by that one, and then it keeps going back, which becomes an absurdity, right? So the point being that the prime being, God, right, can't possibly have there. No one's going to ask, why does God exist? I mean, you can ask it, but it's not a question that's philosophically answerable, because nobody made God, right? So then there's no end purpose to it either. So if you're going to go, so therefore, for this reason, one does not ask, what is the final end existence of God himself? For he is not a created thing. Through these premises, it has become clear that a final end can only be sought with regard to all things that are produced in time. So we can only even ask the question if we believe, like the Torah teaches us, that there was an event called creation, right? If there was no event called creation, then you can't even ask the question of what's the purpose of it all, right? Because it always is, always was. There is no purpose. It just is, right? The laws of nature dictate it that way. I mean to say that with regard to that which has its beginning in an intellect, then one must necessarily, I'm on Papa 449, seek to find out what its final cause is, right? If something that an intellect said, I am going to make such and such, and then went ahead and made it, now you can ask the question of what is his final purpose? Somebody sees me banging together a couple pieces of wood, can ask the question, what is he trying to make? And then he looks at me for a while and he says, oh, he's making a table, right? But if there's nobody there banging the wood, it's just a table because nature necessitates that it should be a table, then it always was and always will be. So there's no place to ask that question. On the other hand, one must not, as we have said, seek the final end of what has not been produced in time, right? Something that has always been, that has never been produced, one cannot ask that question. After this preamble, after I gave you this introduction, Rambam said, I laid down the philosophical foundations about what I'm going to say. You should know that the final end of all that exists ought not to be sought. I'm going to tell you that you shouldn't be asking the question of what's the final end of it all. Why? Right? Because of two reasons. First, I'm going to look at it from Aristotle's point of view, and then I'm going to look at it from the Torah's point of view. This is what the Rambam is about to do, and I'm going to show you why you shouldn't ask that question, why it's not a valid question, right? Of what's the end of it all? Where is this all going? Neither according to our opinion, who assert that the world has been produced in time, right? Nor according to the opinion of Aristotle, who holds that the world is eternal. remember what I told you, that Aristotle's holding the world is eternal is the forebear of today's scientific analysis, which would say, right, the world exists, the rules of science exist because those are the rules. That's the way it is, right? For according to his opinion as to the eternity of the world, first let's look at it from Aristotle's point of view. If the world is eternal, no ultimate end should be sought for any part of the world, right? I can't ask for anything. I can't ask why my cat exists. I can't ask why I exist. I can't ask why the tree outside exists, right? What is the final end of the existence of the heavens? Why do the skies exist? Or why do they have such and such dimensions? Why is the sun this big and such numbers? Why are there 18 bajillion stars in this galaxy? It's not or why is matter as it is? Why does carbon have the qualities that it has? So on and so forth. There's no point. Or what is the final end of this particular species of animals or of plants? Why do oak trees do what oak trees do? Why do otters do what otters do? There's no point. All things derive, according to them, from an eternal necessity that has never ceased and never will cease. The laws of nature are the way they are. They dictate that the world should be the way it is. They dictate that every species of plant and animal and every star in the heaven should be exactly as it is. So it is because it is. You can't ask the question about why. There was no creator. It was never made. So there's no point in asking why it exists, right? So though natural science seeks to find out the final end of every natural being, though through science we try to investigate these things, right? What's going to be with the lion? Or why did the lion come to be a lion, right? Obviously, the Rambam didn't have access to the theory of evolution. But even in those days, they're thinking, so why is a lion like a lion? And now we can give certain answers. Then they gave whatever answers they gave. But that end is not the ultimate end of which we treat in this chapter. I'm asking for the ultimate end, the Rambam says. Science might investigate it. In his day, they'll find out that lions have long nails so that they can tear open the deer and eat it, right? Okay, but what's the real reason why there's a lion? I don't know, because that's how nature works, that there should be lions, right? For it is manifest according to natural science that every natural existence must necessarily have a final end. But that final cause, which is the noblest among the four causes, is hidden as far as the majority of species goes. The final cause, we really don't know. Remember, Rambam is kind of jumbling the cause and the end because they're in this philosophical line of thinking, they're one and the same, right? Like it's kind of like teleological thinking, but it kind of goes forwards and backwards, right? In other words, what caused it to be this way, and what's the purpose of it being this way are really the same question in this line of thinking, and we can't answer either question, right? Other than state the scientific laws that make it happen. So Aristotle can tell you all the scientific laws that govern lions growing nails, right? But it can't tell you why and what's the purpose and what's the point, right? Aristotle constantly states in an explicit way that nature does nothing in vain. What does he mean? Meaning thereby that every natural act has a certain final end. Every action has a reaction. Every cause has an effect, and so on and so forth, right? But so you can find all those causes and effects, but the ultimate cause, the ultimate effect, you can't find. Aristotle also states in express terms that plants are created for the sake of animals. He explains regard to certain beings that exist for the sake of others. He does this in particular with regard to the limbs of animals. However, know that the existence of this final end in natural things has of necessity led philosophers to a belief in a principle other than nature, namely the one that Aristotle calls the intellectual or divine principle, that being the one that makes one thing for the sake of another. They start to think and say, well, I see this causes this, that causes that. There must be some creator, some force that makes it that this should happen so that should happen, right? Remember, this is and many times they would use those kinds of explanations, and our modern equivalent would be finding the physics formula that defines this action, right? Or the mathematical formula that explains this being that. Know too that to the mind of an equitable man, one of the strongest proofs, but the problem with that thinking, if you go with Aristotle, right, is that ultimately, as you keep asking those questions, in the end, all you're saying is that things are because that's the way they are, right? And the Rambam says, but you should know that this is one of the biggest proofs for the fact that there is purpose to the world. Now, remember, Rambam explicitly told us many times in book 2 that when he says the word proof here, and in the Hebrew version, he uses the language ra'aya, which is a proof, right? He doesn't mean a proof, because the Rambam says explicitly many times, right, that these are indicators, right? Once one starts to wonder, well, why is it this way? That is an indicator that argues for the likelihood that there actually is a purpose, there is a reason, right? So because each thing seems to be existing for the purpose of something else. It's teleological. It's what we would call today teleological thinking, right? When you see something, then you say, oh, that everything that happened before that resulted in X, the purpose of all those things happening was for there to be X, right? So if you remember when Darwin first proposed the theory of evolution, so what he had to try to do is get people out of teleological thinking, right? Teleological thinking is saying, for example, right, that the lion has nails that are very good at tearing open deer skin to eat them, right? So the purpose of the lion developing nails is in order that the lion should be able to. So what Darwin did was he took that, made it backwards, right? He said, no, right? The lion developed a nail because 100 million years ago, just one random cat decided to grow a stump on his thing. And this lion figured out that this stump is good at ripping open squirrel fur, right? And then that lion survived more because he had more squirrels to eat. And then, so it wasn't, so so in other words, it didn't happen in order to bring out a certain result. The result happened because of the events that occurred along the way, right? So what Rambam is suggesting, though, here is that when we see the world around us that runs a certain way, it makes somebody wonder and think, right? Even though teleological thinking is scientifically not considered the best way of thinking, but it does make you wonder and make you think, well, it does really seem a lot like there is a purpose to all of this, that somebody wanted or someone wanted the world to result this way, and that everything that happened until now to make the world this way seems like, it really, really smells like it, that it all happened in order to bring about the universe that we have in front of us. Okay. For this proof of purpose on the part of a being possessed in purpose, and purpose can only be conceived with reference to the production in time of something so produced. And when you start to smell, it starts to look like there's purpose to everything. That's when you start saying, well, wait a minute. It looks like, right, there's a purpose to it. And if there's purpose can only happen if there's a creator. Purpose can only happen if somebody decided, I want there to be the following result. So again, it's not a proof, right? But it is an indicator that makes one think when one looks at the world around them and says to themselves, okay, so now let me return. Now that I laid these ideas down, the Rambam says, I shall return to the subject of this chapter, namely to the discussion of the final end. So what is the final end? Let me talk to you about it a little more, Rambam says, or a lot more. I say then, Aristotle has made it clear that in natural things, the agent, the form, and the final end are one and the same thing, right? The whole existence that brings about everything is all the same. I mean to say they are one and the same in species. An example, Zaid, right? Remember, we in Hebrew, we often say Ruvain and Shimon, right? In English, you might say, Joe and John or whatever. So in Arabic, they used to say Zaid and Umar, Zaid and Umar, right? Those are the two, like, Joe and Shmo, whatever, right? So Zaid is the guy who has a son named Umar, right? I'm paraphrasing a little bit. So Zaid caused that Umar, the son, should come to be, right? According to him, according to Aristotle, this is the case regard to all individuals, right? Which are species need reproduction. So in these, the three causes, and he's referring to Aristotelian causes, belong to one species. However, all this refers but to the first finality, the existence of the human species, right? All the more is this so of the finality of what exists as a whole. If we look at the entire universe of everything that exists, what appears to result from the discourse of Aristotle is that, according to him, the ultimate finality of these species consists in the permanence of coming to be and passing away. The end of the story is that there's going to be fathers, there's going to be sons, and then eventually the father's going to die, then the son's going to have a son, and then he's going to die, and then the son, things are going to come to be, and things are going to stop existing. And that's the whole thing. That's everything, which is indispensable for the continuance of coming to be in this inferior matter, because that's how matter works. Matter then doesn't last forever. This is, remember, this is all Aristotelian physics here. Still, the end that can be generated, I mean, the most perfect thing that is possible is generated from it. It brings about another person, a member of that species. For the ultimate purpose consists in bringing about perfection. And it is manifest that the most perfect thing whose existence out of this matter is possible is man, because he is the last and most perfect of these compounds. Remember, again, this is all Aristotelian ideas. Accordingly, even if it is said that all sublunar beings exist for his sake, even if you're going to go ahead and say, right, that everything in the world exists so that man should exist, that would be true from this point of view, right? Then you could say, right, if you're looking at it from this, then you see the whole world exists, everything evolved, although Aristotle obviously wouldn't have used the term evolved, in order that human beings should come about, and that human beings come about to propagate more human beings. And then you could start, and it's all one big cycle, one big wheel that makes for the existence of human beings on this planet. Aristotle ought not to be asked concerning the finality of man's existence. But then you can't ask, well, what's the ultimate purpose of man, seeing that he holds this doctrine affirming the eternity of the world, because he holds that it's the first finality for every individual person that consists in the perfection of the form of the species, because that itself is the point, that he should exist, right? Because, so don't ask me, so what's the point of his existence? Well, his existence is the point of his existence, and it just goes round and round. Consequently, every individual in whom the acts necessarily deriving from that form are perfected has achieved its finality perfectly and completely. The ultimate finality of the species is the permanence of this form through the continuance of generation and corruption. I'm kind of running through this a little bit because it's a little bit repetitive. It is accordingly clear, and I'm ending this paragraph because this right now, this is the end of his discussion of Aristotle's idea, and he's about to jump to the Torah's idea, okay? So I'm reading the last sentence on 450, the last sentence of the big paragraph on 450. It is accordingly clear that, according to the doctrine of eternity, the question of ultimate finality for being as a whole does not arise. So I hope we understand what he just said. So if you believe in Aristotle's theory and you take by his philosophy, then there is no question. The question of what's the purpose of the human being existing is simply a non-question. Because he exists, and he exists so that he should exist, and round and round and round and round and round. And the Rambam went round in circles on purpose 10 times in order to show us that that's how it goes. It just goes round and round in circles. Okay, fine. On the other hand, now the Rambam is going to debunk what a lot of Torah people think the Torah teaches, right? A lot of people think that according to our opinion, when the Rambam says our, he means us as Jews, right? And our doctrine of the production and time of the world as a whole after non-existence, this question is obligatory. They think that, okay, according to the philosophers and Aristotle, the question doesn't make sense. But according to us, this is the ultimate question. It's an obligatory question. If God created the world, and that's what we believe, right? Then why did he create us, right? Why are we here, right? Isn't that the ultimate religious question, right? That is the obligatory question. I mean that it is obligatory to seek out the finality of all that exists. We learn Torah to understand why we're here. What's the purpose? What's the point, right? Doesn't that make sense to you? Haven't you heard many people say this, that the purpose of religion is to tell us, right, that what's the purpose of our existence? We're here in order to, and then fill in the blank, right? And then try to find how to fill that blank. And the Torah will help you fill that blank. It'll show you. It is likewise thought that the finality, and therefore, right, and from that, it becomes the following thought. A lot of people think that the finality of all that exists is solely the existence of the human species so that it should worship God, right? I'm sure you've heard this from Torah scholars who tell you that the point of existence is so that we should be here and that we should serve God, right? That's why we're here. I would be very surprised if anyone listening to this today has not heard that out of the mouth of somebody professing that this is what the Torah teaches, right? That the reason why we're here, the reason why God created the world is ultimately so that there should be people that worship him. And that all that has been made for it alone. And the purpose of everything that was made in creation was made for that reason. So that even the heavenly spheres only revolve in order to be useful to it and bring it into existence. Why do the stars go the way they go? Why the heavenly spheres? Remember, I'm saying this because that's how the Rambam understood the cosmos, right? That they were all embedded in these heavenly spheres that rotate round and round, right? We talked about this numerous times, right? But all those rotations are all in order to bring about such a universe within which man could exist, and that man should worship God, that which is necessary for it. Some passages in the books of the prophets, if taken according to their external sense, Rambam says you might even look through Nevi'im. You might see in the words of the prophets and see if you look at their superficial meaning, right, gives strong support to this thought. For example, it says, Lo shevet yitzara, right? God created the world in order that it should be inhabited. Presumably that verse is referring to inhabited with human beings, right? Or it says, Im lo briti yomam balayla chukot shemayim v'aretz lo samti. If not for my covenant, right, with the day, then I would not have made the laws of heavens and earth, right? The entire heavens and earth were made because of my covenant, because of my Torah, right? And so on and so forth. Now, if the spheres, then Rambam says, if the spheres exist for the sake of man, and if the heavenly bodies exist for the sake of human beings, all the more this is the case for all the species of animals and plants. Then why is it that trees exist? So that I should have shade, so that I should have paper, so that I should have wood to burn and warm my house, so that I should have fruits to eat, right? Why does animals exist? So that I should have meat to eat, that I should have so on and so forth. That's what I think, right? If you have this impression that that's how the world exists, that the purpose is that man should serve God, then every single thing in the world exists in order that man should exist, so that he should, not the spheres and every small thing, right? However, if this opinion is carefully examined, but if you look at this carefully, all the more, no, I'm sorry, as opinions ought to be carefully examined by intelligent men. If you're intelligent, you got to think closely about what you're saying, right? The flaw in it becomes clear. The idea that the world exists for man and for man to serve God, it's obvious that it can't possibly be true. This result is achieved through posing to him who believes his opinion the following question. If somebody tells you that the world exists so that man should exist, so that man should worship God, ask him this question. The final end being the existence of man. If the whole purpose is man should exist, is the creator able to bring him into existence without all these preliminaries? Could God have created a world without grass in it and still have there been a man to worship him? Of course, right? Or was it possible for him to be brought into existence only after they were carried out? Or is it man can only happen if there's grass? Of course not, right? If someone answers that this is possible and he tells you, oh yeah, sure, God could bring man into existence without there being a heaven. So then let me ask you the next question. So then what's the point of all these things? Then why did he have to make grass? Why did he have to make mountains? Why did he have to make rivers, right? If God could have made a man to worship him without these things, then what's the point of those things, right? What is the utility for him of all these things which are in themselves not the final end? If those didn't have an actual purpose, if God didn't make trees because he actually wanted trees, if God made trees because he wants it to be there for man, then why didn't he make man without trees, right? He could have made man without them. Even if the universe exists for the sake of man and the final end of man, as has been said, is to worship God, then I still have a question for you regarding the final end of his worship. Does God need worship? For he may be exalted, would not require greater perfection if he were worshipped by all that he has created and truly apprehended him, nor would he be attained by deficiency if nothing would ever exist except him. If the purpose was for man to worship God, God doesn't need our worship. God would be God whether we worshiped him or not, right? God doesn't need us to pray to him, right? So if the whole purpose and point, it logically makes no sense, Rambam says. It can't be that the world was created for man. Then why create the world? It can't be that man was created to worship God because God doesn't need our worship. If the answer is given that this is not with a view to his perfection, so then you might think, and this is what Jeffrey was hinting, oh, it wasn't, God doesn't need us, right? But it was made so that we can become perfect. It was made for us as human beings to elevate ourselves and become perfect. Mind you, Rama's not saying that it's not true that we're supposed to worship God. He didn't say that. He didn't say that it's not true that we're supposed to make ourselves perfect. Of course we are. But he is about to say the following, right? For that is the most excellent thing for us, namely our perfection. The same question follows necessarily. What is the final end of our existence without perfection? What's the point of our becoming perfect? What do we need us to be perfect for, right? The argument must end with the answer being given that the final end is, in the end of the story, what do you have to say? Because God wanted it that way, right? God wished it so. I just turned to page 452. His wisdom has required this to be so. God said that, in his wisdom, said it should be this way. And this is the correct answer. The bottom line and the end of the story is that God made the world the way he made the world because in his wisdom, this is the way he felt the world should be, right? So if that's true, So accordingly, you will find that the sages of Israel have inserted into the text of our prayers. This is from this is from Ne'ilah on what we say on Yom Kippur at night, right? Thou hast set men apart. Havdalta enosh merosh. It's in the Shemona Esrei of Ne'ilah. We say every Yom Kippur, right? It's apart from beginning and acknowledging that he should stand before thee. Yet who shall say unto thee, what do you do? If he be righteous, what is this to thee? In other words, they explicitly stated that there does not exist a final end, but only the will alone. In the end of the story, it's God's will. That's it. God decided that it should be this way. He created a world with these with these rules of nature because of reasons which we will never fathom. I will never be able to tell you why the value of the physical constant is 0.00012631234 to the 25th exponent, right? I will never be able to tell you why, because there is no reason why, because ultimately it's all going to boil down to the fact that God created the world with those rules because he wanted a world to be the way the world is. But why is a question that we could never ask, right? Now, this being so, and in addition, given the belief in the production of the world in time, thus making it indispensable for us to say that what exists, its causes and effects, could be different from what they are. An incongruity follows necessarily with reference to the existence of everything brought into existence except man. It follows, namely, that all the beings in question, everything on this planet and in this entire universe, have been brought into existence without any final end at all. Not because of a result, right? Not because there's a final end, right? In as much as the only purpose, final end, namely man, could have existed without all of them. Because if you think that the end of existence is the existence of man, well, man could have happened without everything. So the bottom line is everything in this universe is equal. Everything in this universe exists because God willed it to be so, because God created a world that runs the way it runs in his wisdom. For this reason, to my mind, I'm in 452, the second paragraph, the correct view according to the beliefs of the law, according to the Torah, what is the view of the Torah? A view that corresponds likewise to the speculative views, which is also philosophically makes sense, right? Is as follows. It should not be believed that all the beings exist for the sake of the existence of man. The creatures that exist around us are not here for us. They're not here so that we should exist. On the contrary, all the other beings too have been intended for their own sakes and not for the sake of something else. Every animal that exists because God wanted that animal to exist. The cow exists because God wanted there to be cows. The grass exists because God wanted there to be grass. The mountains exist because God wanted there to be mountains. And human beings exist because God wanted there to be human beings. The laws of nature exist because he wanted the laws of nature to be exactly what they are. Thus, even according to our view, holding that the world has been produced in time, the quest for the final end of all the species of beings collapses. That whole question of what's going to be in the end is not a question anymore. It's just not a question. It just fell apart, right? Because in the end of the story, the purpose of it all is God's will. That's the end of the story. That's the only answer to the question. There is no other answer. Once you hit that answer, there's nothing further. There's nothing more than that. For we say that in the virtue of his will, he has brought into existence all the parts of the world, some of which have been intended for their own sakes, whereas others have been intended for the sake of some other things that are intended for its own sake. There are things in the world that are here in order to accomplish something to something else. But in the end of the story, it's all here because it all is there for its own sake. Just as he has willed that the human species should come to exist, he has willed that the spheres and the stars should come to exist. He had willed that the angels, now remember, Rambam has said many times and will say again soon, angels in Rambam's mind are the rules and laws and forces of nature, right? In respect to every being, he intended that being itself, the being itself. And whenever the existence of something was impossible, unless it was preceded by some other thing, he first brought that thing into existence, as in the case of the senses, which precede reason. Now, this goes on, and he's going to, many of the parts of the Torah which are quoted by those proponents of the idea that the world exists for man, the Rambam is going to debunk them. But we're going to have to wait till next week because the hour is almost up. And the Rambam, this is one of the most incredibly consequential chapters of the Moreh Nevuchim, and I really think that, like, when at some point during the week it's going to hit you, the meaning and the depth of what Rambam is saying over here, and how and how impactful this is on how we live our lives, and how humble this makes us as human beings, that everything is not here for us. Think about how that would change your attitude towards nature, change the attitude towards the world around us, change our attitude towards other human beings that are around us, change our attitude towards the things that we have and we own, or that we don't own, or that we want. How it would change your attitude to everything when we just bonk ourselves over the head and remember that it's not here for me. Every single thing that's here has a purpose in and of itself. It's such an incredibly powerful and strong and awesome idea. I can't overemphasize how important this idea is. And it's really the underpinning of Maimonidean philosophy. And I'm really happy that we all got here together. It took us well over 2 years to get here, but we're here. And there's more, of course, that we're going to study next week. That this chapter goes on. I'm at the bottom of 452. I'll open the floor for some last minute comments, but we only have 2-3 minutes, and I'm sorry I didn't leave a lot more time.
I just wanted to say that if we are that humbled, we also maybe forget that we have a responsibility towards the other beings that are here.
That's extremely important. It's going to come up. I promise. See, I told you cheated, but the Rambam, it's going to come up.
I must have learned it once. I mean,
yeah.
As part of Shevet Israel, there's like 3 or 4 chapters that they taught us in high school, but that was more than 30 years ago. So,
all right, well, it's stuck somewhere in the back of your brain, but it's coming up.
hey.
You know why that makes us responsible. But yes.
Anyway, Jeff wants
any
to
other
say
comments?
Also.
Well, I would just add, it wasn't, if you will, a gift for God to create this forum where we have these beliefs that give us a sense of dignity and purpose as part of the scheme of things, even if it's misconceived or
even if it's misconceived. Well, the truth is that when we make ourselves feel good because of things that are not true, ultimately it doesn't help. You end up depressed. If you're truly humble and you recognize how truly small you are, you're not going to end up depressed. You're going to end up in incredible awe and love for God, right? True humility doesn't bring to depression. True humility brings to happiness and satisfaction.
Well, I don't think that's inconsistent with the thesis. So.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood.
You understand.
Okay.
It's complicated.
Right.
Would he believe that then, say, people who are poor, it's just part of the design and they just happen to be born that way? Whereas, some people believe they're being punished. People have all different beliefs why people are poor, why somebody's born into a good family, so to speak, good health, and so forth. So what would be his view?
No, you're asking a good question, but Rambam doesn't really he didn't, in the last chapter, you have to read over chapter 12, he didn't really address that. He didn't say, why there's inequities. He addressed a broad picture that so much of our suffering is because we're not satisfied. So he was in essence telling the poor person, right? The bottom line is you have something to eat for dinner. You have you have a body, you have health. In other words, and many of the things that we suffer from, but it's not a full answer. There's still going to be questions. Why does this person get ill? He didn't answer that question. I kind of hinted to it when I told you we're going to learn how Rambam deals with evil, and it's going to leave us with questions. It's not going to be it's a lot of critics of the Rambam criticized him for never really addressing the question of the existence of evil. In a broad sense, he answered a lot of the questions, maybe even most of the questions, but not the hardest hitting ones, And what you're asking is really the hardest hitting ones. I can tell you for sure that he would not ever say and did not, that a person is suffering because, a person is born poor because, I don't know, because he deserves it. That just doesn't make any sense in Maimonidean theology. It just doesn't go it doesn't make any sense at all.
Does he answer it in any of his other writings?
Not really. The Rambam's treatment of the idea of evil is here. There's a little bit, we'll touch on it, he answers a lot of it, but he just doesn't, it's not satisfying. I hate, it's just one of those areas. Now he will talk about the book of Job soon, in a couple chapters, where he addresses it a little more, but I mean, maybe you will be satisfied, but I have a feeling when you read that, you might get some more answers. You might get a little bit closer, but you're still going to be left without an answer. And maybe it's because Rambam didn't have an answer to that question, and maybe there is no answer to that question. Maybe that's
well, does it get to this whole idea of, there is no answer because the answer is it's God's will, and that's because I've heard people say that.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. The book of Eov is worthwhile. The book of Job is worthwhile reading. And of course, I'm in the middle of teaching it in my Let the Prophet Speak podcast for those that want to go there. But in the end of the story, you're right. God says in Job, God says all kinds of really cool stuff, but he never tells us what the reason is. And we don't know. I mean, but so if you're left unsatisfied, maybe that's the point. Maybe we'll never know.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else before we close up? All right. Well, have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And thank you for joining me again, and looking forward to seeing you all next week.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Be well. Bye-bye.